The United States was now entering into World War II. The depression-crippled economy of the 30s would now be revived with a new sense of direction and spiritual purpose. In order to produce the various products needed for war, the economy would have to go all out with every available worker needed. And of course, to fight the war, every available fit young man was called upon. In the wake of the Pearl Harbor attack, many wanted to enlist immediately. Army and Navy recruiting stations were deluged with volunteers. One of the first recruits from Bartow County was Bill Walford. Herschel Weisbrom recently caught up with Bill in the cockpit of a Flying Fortress B-17 on temporary display at our local airport.
Well, Bill, this has got to bring back a lot of memories for you.
Well, Herschel, when I saw this plane coming in from Atlanta the other day, it came in from Peach City Cab, and I knew the heading it was on. I was out in my backyard, you know where that is, on Arrowhead Drive. And before it was in sight, I knew those engines. And it brought back a lot of memories.
Give us, putting it in perspective, World War II broke out in 1941. Where was Bill Wofford December of 41 when World War II started for the United States?
December the 2nd of 41, December the 7th of 41, I was in Charlottesville, Georgia. And at that time, I was waiting for an appointment to be a flying cadet in the United States Army Air Corps. On the 15th of January, I received my appointment, and I was at Maxwell Field that same day. And I began my training in 1942 on January the 15th.
Now, I understand you flew a B-17 out of Africa and laid out of Italy. Your first experience over in combat was flying missions out of Africa.
That's correct. We, to kind of give you a little more information, we flew our own planes from West Palm Beach, Florida, down through South America. I flew down to Trinidad, Port of Spain, from there to Belém, Brazil, and from Belém to Brazil to Natal. And from Natal, we flew directly 1,800 miles across the South Atlantic to Dakar, Africa. From there, we flew up to Marrakech, and from Marrakech, we flew up to a place called Rabat, which you've heard many times, and then in Morocco. It's the capital of Morocco. From that point, that was a staging area. From that point, I went to a place, to my combat squadron, which was the 32nd Squadron of the 301st Bomb Group, to a place called Saint Donat. And Saint Donat was near Constantine in Algiers. From there, we flew on up to flew missions, and the first mission I flew out of Saint Donat was to Sicily, a place called Gerbini, Gerbini.
What year was this?
This was in June of 1943.
And that was the first of 51 missions you flew.
And 51, that's correct.
Now, this, let's tell us a little bit about this aircraft.
Well, this airplane is a Flying Fortress B-17, of course. It's 4 engines. Each engine has 1,300 horsepower with a Wright Cyclone engine in it. And it cruises about 155 miles per hour. At altitude, it's doing about 300, and we generally flew it at altitude of about 26,000 feet. That was about average altitude. We were on oxygen 100% at that time, demand. This plane, of course, is not pressurized as we know our airliners today. And by comparison, it's a fairly small airplane compared to what we see today. We carried a crew of 10 people in this airplane. Beginning up front was the bombardier navigator compartment. That's down in front of me, of our cockpit here where we're sitting. And then the pilot and co-pilot here. Back of me, where Guy is standing right now, is a turret gunner, top turret gunner. And he had twin 50 caliber machine guns. Back of him is the bomb bay. We carried various amounts of bombs from all the way down from 1,000-pound bombs to very small bombs.
That would depend upon the mission.
Depending upon the mission. Back of the bomb bay is a radio gunner. And there was a radio compartment that had many radios in it that we could communicate almost anywhere. After that were two 50 caliber machine guns each for the waist gunners, and then the tail gunner in the very tail.
And he has to crawl through narrow spaces to get back there.
That's right. Underneath, I forgot to mention, was a ball turret gunner. He was always a very small man, usually about 5'2" or 3 or 4. And it took some small person to get in that ball turret.
Now you started in 1943. How long a period of time did it take that you completed your 51 missions?
I completed my 51 missions in January of 1944, and I was then sent back home to Charlottesville. I came back by way of, we were up by this time. We were up at a place called Cerinola, south of Rome, Italy, and they sent me over to Bari, Italy, over on the east coast of Italy. And I met a fellow named Walter Pittman from Cartersville, Georgia there. And he helped me arrange passage and transportation for 20-odd people that were going back to the United States. We went from there back into Tunis, and from there on to Casablanca, and we left Casablanca by boat, troop ship, back to Norfolk. I arrived back home to Cartersville, Georgia in March of the 15th of 1944.
We're going to get back to some of your missions in a moment, but I think your flying career continued after the war also, didn't it?
That's right. After I came back from overseas, Doris Whitfield and I were married April 2nd, 1944. And we went to Miami Beach for a little R&R and a little honeymoon. And I was sent to Sebring, Florida, which was a B-17 training base, and I trained 2 classes of pilots in the 17. And then I became a VIP trainer. I was getting colonels and brigadier generals out of the Pentagon in Washington who were going overseas. Soon after I'd been there about a year, I was given an opportunity. I was selected by Eastern Airlines to fly with them. So it was called a release to essential industry. And 80 of us out of the Air Force were selected to go to the various airlines. 20 of us went to Eastern, 20 more to United, American, and so forth.
What did you fly with Eastern?
I flew a DC-3, 21 passengers, pilot, co-pilot, and 1 stewardess, and I flew with Eastern for 2 years on the Atlanta-Chicago run.
And then you came back, got into real civilian life, and I think you got in the automobile business.
That's right. I left Eastern to go into partnership with my brother-in-law in Walford Whitfield Motor Company, which was a Buick dealership. And for the next probably 30 years or so, I remained more or less in the automobile business.
Let's get back to the war. Now, you were in the African and Italian theater of operations. Most of the folks who see the war movies, and that's what the current generation, that's all they know about World War II. Most of the B-17 action was over Europe. How did your missions in Italy and Africa differ from those when they were flying out of England over France and Germany?
Well, I would say that our missions were most of them were a lot easier because we could fly over water. We could fly over the Adriatic and the Mediterranean, and we didn't have a lot of land. We could move to our targets in Italy off of the Adriatic. The same thing's true for Sicily. We were mostly over water. And
without the radar they have now, they didn't know you were there.
That's right. They didn't know it until we were pretty much on them. As we got inland, our missions got rougher. They were very rough over Sicily because there was a high concentration of German firepower there. And my first mission that I went on was over Gabini. And I lost an engine. And it was so, I never had seen flak before. And it really just scared the daylights out of me. I hadn't planned on losing an engine, and all of a sudden here was oil everywhere, and the engine was out, and we had to feather it, and we were having fighter planes on us, and it was really, for a person on his first mission, it was really a little more than I could handle. But as the missions grew on later, we got more used to it, and I think maybe we were sealed to it to a certain point. A lot of people, as in life, can handle situations up to a point. I mean, pilots and crew members were about the same way. I've seen people that couldn't hardly manage 15, 20 missions. I think probably my breaking point was somewhere around 35. And from then on, I thought every time I went up, I was going to be shot down. Something would happen to me, but somehow I made it on.
Tell us a little bit about some of your more memorable missions.
Well, some of the worst missions we flew after we got on into Tunis. Then we began to fly on up into Italy, and we were flying mostly, we were bombing bridges and important rail transportation areas that the Germans were sending down. Even one time, we had to fly over Italy and attack some German troops at 5,000 feet with very small bombs. The worst mission that I ever flew, I think my squadron ever flew, was over a place called Winterstadt, Austria. Now this was after we had gotten on up into the point that we could fly well into Germany, Austria, and those countries. I lost an engine over the target. It was very, very highly concentration of flak and fighter planes. We even encountered the German Focke-Wulf 190s, which was Goering's Yellow-Nose Squadron. Also two Su-62 jets, which we'd never seen.
And that was toward the very end of the war.
Well, it was towards the end of my missions, and this would be in November of 1943. So the war was still a long way off. We had invaded Italy, but we'd not invaded France yet. I lost 4 of my squadron out of 6 that day. Only 2 of us came home.
Now, you've lost a couple of engines and things. How does this bird fly on 3 engines, or even on 2?
Flies just great. This airplane can take more punishment than any airplane that ever was made during World War II. And it was just rugged. It's come back, I've come back with 2 engines many times. I have had as many as 3 engines out, but able to crank one of them back up coming in.
All right, now, when you flew these missions, I know different missions where you flew at different altitudes, but when you were your basic missions, you flew at quite high altitudes, particularly for that day.
Right, we were flying average 25, 26,000. Temperature's 40 degrees below zero, very cold.
Not pressurized, not well heated, or was it heated at all?
No heat. No heat for the guys back in the back. Along towards the middle of our missions, we began to get electric suits. And we would plug those in, and they were just like an electric blanket. They were made the same way. And of course, we had fleece-lined boots and heavy jackets. Over the target, you'd be surprised to know that we wore helmets, steel helmets, just like infantrymen.
What were some of the well-known targets that you bombed?
Well, some of the targets were Regensburg, Winterstadt I mentioned, Palermo in Sicily, Messina Straits, Gabini, Toulon and Marseille were submarine pens in the southern part of France, and they were always rough. And on those missions, I remember 2 or 3 times, we began to find the German fighter planes flying head-on at us. Instead of coming in from the tail, they were flying straight ahead at us and firing, and it's awful disconcerting to see those little flicks of machine gun fire.
Do you take any evasive action? I mean,
no, you're sitting here just steady as you can be. You can't do anything. And after you get over the target, of course, the bombardier takes over. You fly with him for a certain time, and then you fly what was called a PDI. And then after he got about 2 minutes out of the target, then he flew the plane from then on in with his controls.
Now, this is going to be telecast mainly in Bartow County, and there's a story I've heard for years about one of your friends from Cartersville came to see you socially, and you took him on a mission.
That's right. That was Lieutenant Ted Dunn, who was infantryman, and Ted had been wounded up in the front lines of Italy. And I came off a mission one afternoon, and they said, "There's this lieutenant out there in the Jeep wanting to see you, Captain." And I went out, and there was Ted Dunn in a Jeep called a Georgia Peach. And since we'd just come off a mission, we didn't expect to fly again that next day, so we decided to party a little bit and celebrate. And about 10, 11 o'clock at night, they posted a mission cruise for the next day, and I was on it again. And this was to Sofia, Bulgaria. And we decided that Ted would go with us, so we got together and got him a fleece line flying suit and put him in, smuggled him, literally smuggled him with the rest of the crew into the tail gun section, and my tail gunner briefed him on the operation of the 50 calibers back there. And he flew the mission back in the waist gun section and did the throws.
I bet he would. About how much time rest did you get between missions?
Mostly 2 or 3 days between missions. Rarely ever flew a mission one day right after the other.
But normally you would fly 2 to 3 missions a week.
That's right, 2 to 3.
About what commercial pilots fly now?
That's right, about the same. We would average 6, 7 hours a mission. The longest mission I went on would be one I went on up into Austria one time. We flew 17 hours, but we had to stop in Sicily. We were flying from Africa to Austria and refueled in Sicily. And I logged 17 hours.
Well, Bill, congratulations on making it through the war and making it a long time after. It's been 50 years.
50 long years, and this is a real treat to sit again and see this B-17.
Well, I'll tell you right now, you look at home in it. Thank you a lot.
Thank you a lot, Herschel. And thank you.
America's war effort called for a labor force large enough to fill not only those vacancies left by men and women who had gone into the service, but also new jobs created by urgent wartime needs. To bring this force up to strength, the nation looked to its women. Of the millions of women who joined the war effort, the greater number were unpaid volunteers who gave of their own time to perform vital services on the home front. Before long, the war was not only at the kitchen door of America, but also inside the living rooms, the schools, shops, and movie theaters. Homefront Americans knew very well that there was a war on. They were reminded of it every day. Let's join Sidney Jolly and Lib Jackson as life on the home front in Bartow County is discussed. Lib, are you a native of Cartersville?
I am a native of Cartersville, and I married a guy that was a native of Cartersville, so I've been here all these many years. A wonderful place.
Well, that's great. Sidney, how about yourself?
Same with me. I was born here, and I've seen so many changes, Guy, good and bad, because I'm from the old school. I like the old things.
I understand. Lib, where were you when Pearl Harbor was bombed?
You know, I think it was on a Sunday, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I had been to church, but it wasn't till that afternoon that we really knew that it had been bombed. And we were all just couldn't believe what had really happened.
Were you with your entire family? Or?
Yeah, I was married at the time, so I had one child at that time, and of course none of us knew what really was going to come from it. So it was a very scary moment for all of us.
Well, did you rush home to turn on the radio?
Well, Warren was quite a radio fiend, so he always had the radio on, so he would catch the news, and I think he is the one that first relayed the news to all of us.
Sydney, where did you hear about it?
I was off at school and fortunately had been invited out to lunch that day. And following lunch, the people wanted to take a ride. And as we went out the front door, someone else was in the house, maybe an older person. And they said, "Hey, wait a minute," said, "Pearl Harbor's just been bombed." Well, we didn't think too much of it, and we said, "Well, let's go on with the ride, we'll come back." Well, when we came back, everybody on the campus, "Where have you been?" Says, "Pearl Harbor's been bombed away, and we've been looking for everybody that wasn't here." So from then on, all the rest of the night, we stayed up and had the radios on.
And what school was that?
That was in LaGrange.
LaGrange. Okay. Now, when did you graduate from college and come back to Cartersville?
I came to Cartersville in 43. And I taught school for 6 months. That wasn't for me. So then Ron Frau, editor and owner of the Bartow Herald, some of his boys were leaving, and I wasn't to take their place, but they did need somebody in the office. And so I know the first note I left for Ron, that someone had called him, and they let out a little oath and says, "You are there." Says he's never received a message from us before, and now you're leaving messages for him. So I was there from then on.
Living in Cartersville when the news was spread, what was the reaction, or did you see a noticeable difference in the community?
Well, it did not take long for us to begin to see a difference in the community, because when they start taking our young boys, off to put them in service, it just was a different picture. And I remember that they would gather at the old Braben Hotel and put them on a bus stand there, and we would give them lunches, because back then you couldn't stop at a fast food place to get your lunch, to take them to Fort Mac, to be examined and so forth, to see if they were going to be, and it was touching all of us, because it was all of our friends and our neighbors too.
Did you see a big rush to sign up for the service?
Right at first, there was a right good rush, don't you think? There was a right good rush at first. But then, as time went along, I guess you didn't have much say-so, because they just took you at a certain age. They took Warren, but they turned him down on account of a health problem. And of course, I was greatly relieved.
I can understand.
Yeah.
See, did you see the same thing at school? Did a lot of the men leave?
Yes, and you remember that the story goes here that Ben Geary had a drugstore 3/4 of the way down on Main Street. Champs was up on the corner, and then Mr. Ben had one on down. And two of the, as they call them, soda jerkers back with the counter, they said, "Let's go." Well, they just put down their rags that they were cleaning the counter with and walked out. But Lib mentioned they served the lunches to the boys leaving. That was one of the many Red Cross projects. That was the nutrition, and they had the bandages that we rolled in the upstairs of the then City Hall. That's the police, the fire department now. And hot. There was no air conditioning. It was open every day, on Sunday afternoon and at night. And I went on every Sunday afternoon. Oh yes. We had a course in just how you did it. And then of course the Red Cross had the Bloodmobile, and going back to the Bloodmobile, the local DAR, the Etowah chapter of the DAR, was one of the first ones to purchase a mobile unit for the Bloodmobile. And when the first one came to Cartersville, it had the DAR chapter on the side of the unit.
truck. Yeah.
It seems like, now, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't say this, but it seems like it was the first stop that was made by the unit. They brought it to Cartersville because of that. Francis Adair was the instigator in raising the money.
Now, did we have a big Red Cross chapter at the time, or did somebody just step forward and?
There had always been a little
Small.
inkling of one, and they had a drive every year. But then when that happened, well, it just sort of mushroomed, and everybody got into it, and they even had a knitting unit.
Group.
And, the yarn was given out in the Cherokee Club Room, which was then above the Mary Montford Memorial Library, which is where the fire station is now. And I had to work every day and part of Saturday, but on Saturday afternoon, I opened that up for people to bring their knitting garments or collect the yarn, and you could always also go to Mamie Walford's, Bill's mother, and get the yarn.
Now, were the other groups collecting other items to send to the troops overseas, food items or clothing or socks or anything like that?
You know,
It was mostly handled by the Red Cross.
Red
Of course,
Cross,
the churches entered into it maybe in a way, and all the churches had their bulletin boards on the wall with the service people's names on them.
Now, before the war, we were in the Depression, and then came the war. What impact did you see, I guess, with the community? I guess a lot of people were in really bad financial shape with the
they
war
were
coming on.
very. And it thrilled my husband to death when Roosevelt began to bring in rural electrification. And because people in the country had no electricity, and that just pleased him to no end. He just thought that was just wonderful.
Now, was that prior to the war or during the war?
It was during Roosevelt's administration. That was one of the first things he
one
did.
of the first things, yes.
Because he noticed it down at Warm Springs that people in the
Did not
area didn't have
any.
electricity.
Yeah.
I know the first
And that
time.
did a great deal for the whole state.
First
A great
time
deal.
somebody came from Dallas to Cartersville at night, and they realized, well, what is this all we're seeing? And they said, oh, people have got electricity in the houses.
It
I bet
really
it did
was.
make a difference.
It did make quite a difference. And it took quite a while for everybody to begin to have it, too.
And you remember, you mentioned the Depression. I think that the Depression and the war brought people closer together than anything has ever done.
Well, I guess that is right. The Depression, no one had much, so everybody sort of stood by each other.
That's right.
They
And
really
I'm
did.
glad that I grew up in the Depression because I have an appreciation for things that
You never would
now,
have had.
you know,
Young people
think,
just can't imagine.
no, there's no way.
Just can't imagine.
Were the downtown businesses, were they open full time?
They were open
Yeah.
full time. In fact, we married in '33, and the furniture store stayed open till about 10 o'clock on Saturday night.
Yes.
And they
Everything
opened
did.
back then at 5:30 in the morning. And you were just hungry for a quarter. If anybody came in there after 7 o'clock with a quarter, you were thrilled to death to see them because that quarter meant a lot.
Right.
Yeah, I've heard some people say that their daddy had a store, a grocery store, and that every morning he would go early and open up, hoping that he would have 3 15-cents to give his children for lunch at school. Says lots of times he would go over there and
Well,
he
of
wouldn't
course,
have it.
back then you could get a hot dog for 5 cents or a drink for 5 cents.
Yeah.
And
And the lunch at school was 15 cents.
was it 15?
Yeah.
Wow. I wish that was still happening today.
Well, you wouldn't want the other things that go with it, though. But as I said, no one had much more than you had, so it really brought you together because you had a common ground there. And nobody was trying to outdo the other fellow, you know.
During the war, everybody had a victory garden, whether it was 2
Much
by
enough.
2 or 30 by 40.
Right.
You know, there was a time when families would go pick cotton. The schools, see, got out early. they didn't go to school in the fall till late because they needed all those farmers' children to help gather the crops. And we even went and picked cotton, but I tell you, I think I would have starved. That was a much harder job than anyone ever thought it would be.
You knew what a back was.
Yeah, it surely did.
I bet it was. When did rationing start? When did y'all start seeing
You know,
the
this doesn't
rationing
have a
items?
date on it. When was that? And I'm not sure.
It was soon after Pearl Harbor.
Yeah, it was soon after
But I don't know
Pearl
the date.
Harbor, but this doesn't have a date on it. I looked to see. But this was,
No, that's not a date.
What kind of items were rationed?
gas was rationed, shoes were rationed, sugar was rationed, coffee was rationed. I know we always laugh because one or two people that didn't drink coffee, when it got so scarce, they started wanting coffee.
Yeah.
So it just shows how the mind works, doesn't it?
One afternoon, you looked out and you saw this line of people. And at the A&P store during the war was at the corner of Wall and Main. All right, that line of people went all the way across the railroad track and on up Main Street. What they were lined up for, word had gotten out that the A&P store had received a load of lard, not Crisco, but just lard. And everybody was ready for it.
They were.
That's what it was,
Oh,
because
they
that's what they
hoping
made the
they'd get
biscuits
some.
and the gravy out
This
of.
is right.
How did you get your ration coupons? I noticed you have one with you. Where did you get those?
Well, they were given out, I guess, through the city some way. I know that during this time, I had an aunt that lived in Chicago, and they had to come south on account of his health in the spring. And they wanted to take my children and me back to Chicago with them in the car. And then I had a sister that lived in St. Louis, so we took a train over to St. Louis, and I took a severe cold on that trip. This was during the war, and gas was rationed, and was really very sick. And you know, back then doctors came to call on you, and they had to have the doctor with me. And when Warren, my husband, and my dad found out about it, they got together with some relatives and got enough ration stamps to drive to St. Louis to bring us home. And that was really something back then to think that we could get back. The doctor was so provoked with me because he thought I shouldn't have ever come up that way.
Excuse me. One of the things I remember was a man came in the newspaper one day and says, "Miss," says, "I live up on Stamp Creek," and says, "Me and my wife's got a son and he's in service." Says he's somewhere in the Pacific, and says, "We got a letter from him," and says, we don't read. Says, "Would you read it to me?" Well, it was just a tablet piece of paper, very short, but he told him that it was, I remember a little bit, it was rough being where he was, and said, "I can't tell you where I am." And so he would bring a letter like that in every few weeks, and I would read it to him. And then one day I said, "Would you like to write your son a letter?" And he looked and he said, "Well, yes, ma'am, but I don't write." I said, "Well, come on and sit down and we'll compose a letter." So we did. And when the war was over, the son came back and he brought him in and says, "I want you to meet the lady who wrote the letters for us." So
That's nice.
that's one of the things you remember.
How about, I see visions of the, I guess the so-called dreaded Western Union man. Did we have that here?
Oh, yeah.
That is right.
Harry Dorsey, I will never forget that
This
one.
is right. He
So
went down in the Pacific. He was a pilot, and that was all they ever really knew. His plane was shot down.
But when the notice would come in, he would take it out to the home that maybe a son was lost or captured. Or,
This
And
is
during
right.
that time, it was Dot Sandifer who had Dot Shaw, who had the Western Union.
Boy, I bet that was a hard job.
She said, well, she would make her mother go
a
with her.
very. That was a bad thing to get those messages, and there were a good many, I guess, that did come in.
How about the civil defense at the time? Did you have blackout drills at night?
Yeah, and you know, we bought shades that would keep out all the light. They called blackout shades, and so nobody could see in any light at all.
I guess Warren was a block warden, wasn't he? I
Yes,
was. I'm sure he was.
uh-huh.
Colonel McNaughton, he started all of that.
Yes,
we
he
had
did.
classes,
That's
learn what
right,
to do.
had to learn.
We
all
had
these-
casualties on my block one night, and would-be's.
Uh-huh.
We had a hard hat and a special flashlight and an armband. Well, and everybody took part. I mean,
and nobody grumbled about it.
No,
you just
no.
knew that was your
It was
share.
a law and you had to do it.
That's right.
Sure.
And then you were interested in your country too.
there was a lot
Meant a
of
lot.
a respect for it.
Right. Did you see a lot of train traffic? Were there troops coming through that stopped over in Cartersville by any chance?
I guess they did.
Seemed like the train was every 5 minutes.
There were a lot of trains, and of course I've always lived right with them, so I ought to remember.
They still are.
Still very noisy.
Yeah.
But I was wondering if any troops got off at the depot in Cartersville and stayed overnight, or did you have to entertain
Well, I
any,
tell you,
or-
a lot of the big vans, they'd work up a group going through here, and sometimes they would break down and have to stay. And was that WPA days too? Seemed like it was. And they would stay at some of those camps around, WPA camps.
I don't really remember. But I know there were troop trains going through, and they would all be hanging out the windows.
Yeah. Maybe almost in the boxcars.
Yeah.
Then.
How about when the victory in Europe came?
I remember
that.
where I was. I was playing bridge that afternoon at Minnie Bob Fowler's, and Hannah heard it on the news and called me up. She was just a little girl, but they knew that was wonderful news.
Yeah.
And I got to tell everybody, and I think it broke up the game because
Probably
everybody was
did,
so
yeah.
happy,
Because everybody had somebody they were
interested
glad
in it.
to know they'd be coming
And
home.
then didn't know what was going to happen if we didn't get it settled.
Then when they signed the treaty or the war in the
Japan.
Pacific was over, I was walking home from work. It was late in the afternoon. Everybody, it broke on the radio, of course, and everybody, as you walk, each house would be a different sound,
Coming out.
But that's what they were listening to.
Did y'all have a big celebration in town, or?
I know
Each to himself.
I went to the Episcopal church and had a prayer. And then, of course, whistles. See, every manufacturing company, that's what I miss today, Lib. Every one of them had a different whistle.
Whistle, that's right.
Kennewick Yarn, the oil mill, Goodyear, Easy, the
Mills,
city.
all of them would blow those whistles.
Yeah.
And they blew.
Yeah.
I can hear them now.
Yeah.
They really did ring.
And then the city blew the siren, which was up on top of the fire station at that time. I don't think they have that anymore.
I personally was not living during World War II, but as a young man growing up in the 50s and 60s, I often asked one particular question of my father, and that was, what did you do in the war? Some of the answers I got resembled more of the exploits of John Wayne or the bombing missions of 12 O'Clock High, and of course I believed every word of it. To me, he was a hero. I do know for certain that he achieved the rank of captain and earned the Bronze Star while serving in the Army Air Corps. His service as a staff officer of the 9th Bomber Division took him to countries such as England, France, and Belgium. There were numerous other heroes from Bartow County, including the 83 who lost their lives defending our country. One who returned to tell his story lived next door to my father in Atco. His name is Ken Floyd. Please watch and listen as Ken tells of his exploits during World War II. Now, did you get drafted, or was that your decision?
No,
just to-
I enlisted. No, I was in regular Navy.
Uh-huh.
For a specific hitch, and I was in about 6 years. Well, I was in before the war till after the war ended, because being in regular Navy, you had a regular hitch to, so many years put in instead of all the reservists, all the draftees, we call them. They were in for the duration. As soon as the war ended, they were discharged if they wanted to.
Now, where did you take your basic training?
Norfolk, Virginia, and
And what was your first assignment after Norfolk?
the aircraft. Well, they just had built or just had commissioned the USS Hornet, and they just graduated me out of boot camp, so they needed a lot of crew, and I fell into it. You know, I was put on the Hornet.
What was your assignment on the Hornet?
I was flight deck what we call flight deck handling crew, and you worked on the flight deck, and what you did is push airplanes. After they all landed, they all taxied up forward till they all got in. Then they had like 8 or 10 crews of us that we'd all get around the airplane, push it back to the fantail, and tie them down so they'd be ready to launch them again.
Now, when Pearl Harbor was bombed on December 7th, 1941, where were you?
I was in Norfolk, Virginia.
What was the atmosphere at the time when the announcement came?
Well, it was kind of jarring, you know. Now, I remember it was Sunday morning, and an hour or two after the attack started out there, we declared war on Japan, and they called everybody up to that. Well, going back a little bit, up to that point, the Navy was like a civilian job. Everybody had Sunday off, anyway, so everybody laying around the barracks, whatnot, and they called everybody over to the hangar and read the articles of war to them, and read you all that stuff about desertion. You'd be subject to be shot, you know. And I remember I thought, good Lord, you're gonna have to really toe the line. They'll shoot you, anything you do wrong, you know. But it wasn't really that way.
So when did you set sail after that announcement?
Well, we left Norfolk and went on a shakedown cruise, which went down to the Gulf of Mexico. All the pilots were new guys just out of Pensacola, and all the crew was new. And we spent about 6 weeks down the Gulf of Mexico, just landing planes and then roll them all back, and they take off again. That went on all day long, and I think we did that for about 6 weeks, and then we about in March, I believe about March, we pulled out for good. We went down the East Coast and went through Panama, and went up to the East Coast. Yeah, and I remember, I think that was in March, and anyway, Panama Canal, they have a Gatun Lake right in the middle of it, and all the ships steam under their own power to the other locks and on the far end. And we passed this Australian transport, and we passed real close, and we knew these Australians. They had them go to hell hats on, you know, turned up. They were waving, and I found out later they were the first Australian to go. They were headed to North Africa. And we was headed to Pacific, and everybody waved, and a lot of cheering and hollering. You could hear them. We were that close.
Now, from that point, did you go to San Diego or go on toward Pearl Harbor?
Yeah. No, we went up to, well, we stopped in San Diego for some reason, I don't know what, and then went on to Alameda Naval Air Station. That's in San Francisco Bay, across from San Francisco, and we tied up the dock there, and here comes Doolittle's airplanes. They towed them down to the dock, and we loaded them aboard with a big crane.
Some Mitchell B-25s.
Yeah.
Big plane.
Yeah, we loaded 16 of them, you know, and the crew, like myself, you never knew what was fixing to happen. So we were saying, golly, we're going to haul these airplanes to Australia. We're going to get to go to Australia or Alaska. And so we loaded 16 of them on there, and then a day or two later we pulled out. And all of that stuff was supposed to be top secret, but we sat there with them 16 B-25s on deck, and then went out under the Golden Gate Bridge, and I guess there's thousands of people saw us leave with those B-25s, but the word never got out, I guess. Anyway, we headed west, and the second day out at sea, the captain came along the intercom and on the PA system, and he said, we are going to 450 miles of Tokyo and launch these aircraft for a strike against Japan. That may not be word for word, but golly, everybody's that shook everybody up, you know. We said, shoot, no way.
It's kind of a dangerous mission when the Pacific Ocean's owned by the Japanese at this time.
Yeah, and that close, going that close, Japs had they had a big Air Force at that time, you know, and 400 miles or so, that's nothing.
Mm-hmm. Now, did you ever think those B-25s would get off the deck of that aircraft carrier?
Well, yeah, we before we left Norfolk, we loaded one on and went out to sea for 3 or 4 days, and they flew it off, and nobody thought anything about it, you know. Doolittle and that bunch that got that thing up, they just wanted to see if it could be done. So we took a B-25 out and flew it off, and then we went back to Norfolk and never saw the plane again. And nobody thought much about it. We figured that's just another goofball thing that somebody wanted to do. And they didn't. The main problem was all these guys that flew them were Air Force guys. None of them had ever flown off a ship before, and that also happened to be the roughest day. The water was the roughest I'd ever seen it in the whole time I was in the Navy. They'd had a typhoon go up through there just a day or two earlier, and the forward end, the big swell stretched out like 300 yards, I guess, 300 or 400 feet from peak to peak, and we were going over one and under one.
Mm-hmm.
And these guys had to take off in that. This signal officer, he'd wave them off just as the forward end was lifting up out of the water, and God, these are Air Force guys flying these planes, and anyway, when they'd leave, they'd see that water, and almost every one of them, they almost stalled, you know. They trying to pull back to get altitude, and every one of them almost stalled, but they didn't. They dropped down, 10, 15 feet from the water, it looked like, and then they'd get flying speed.
Now, you showed me a real good photograph that you have where you're standing on the deck as Doolittle's in his plane about to take off.
Yes.
This was, for the audience to know, around April 18th, 1942, when the raid took place. After the planes were off, did y'all turn around and just hightail it back to
Yeah.
safety?
Back where?
Back to safety, wherever
Oh,
safety
yeah.
was.
Yeah, we, just the second that last plane cleared the deck, we went into this high-speed turn, and God, you had to, I thought they'd go roll the ship, you know, and we turned around and headed back the other way. During takeoff, they always head into the wind, but I guess the wind was blowing east, so we were heading into the wind, and then this second to last plane was off. They started turning, boy, we took off to get away from there.
Right. Now, the next major action you saw was what?
Midway. Yeah, we went back to Pearl Harbor from that Tokyo raid, and so we pulled out of there with the Yorktown and Enterprise, and we went to Midway, and Midway Battles started June 3rd and 4th and 5th. It lasted 3 days.
1942.
Yeah. And of course they sank the Yorktown. They didn't bother us, or they didn't bother the Enterprise. They concentrated on Yorktown. They damaged it bad enough that they didn't have any power, and then we didn't see them anymore. I heard later they got a big seagoing tug out there, and they had it under tow to go back to carry it back to Pearl Harbor, and a submarine caught up with it and sank it finally. It didn't actually sink during the Midway battle, but they crippled it, and then a submarine sank it.
After the Battle of Midway, where did y'all go? Back to
Pearl Harbor. And then, well, we didn't go directly back. The Midway thing, the Japs had another smaller bunch of ships that were going to capture Etowah, which they did up in the Aleutians. Mm-hmm. And we went up there. We headed up that way, and we got up, I don't know how far north we got, but it got cold and foggy. And God, somebody finally figured out that you couldn't fly aircraft in weather that foggy, so we turned around and went back to Pearl Harbor. And then next thing that happened was we sat around Pearl Harbor for a while, and let's see, that was in June, and then in August the Marines landed on Guadalcanal, and we went down there to use our aircraft for support the Marine, 1st Marine Division. And we were down there in 96 days at sea at one time. And then October, well, and then we came back to Pearl Harbor, and then we went back to Guadalcanal, and on October the 26th, we got sunk down there. There's another Jap carrier task force, and we were down there with the Enterprise, and here come, anyway, this Jap carrier task force came after us, and we knew they were there, and we both sent air groups again after each other, and they sank us. They concentrated on us that time.
Now that was the Battle of Santa Cruz.
Yeah. and it's right off Guadalcanal. But they'd already had so many battles at Guadalcanal, they had to come up with a new name. And
About what time of morning? How long had they been attacking before it was clear that y'all were going to have to abandon ship?
well, it started about 8 o'clock in the morning, something like that. And by about 3 o'clock, we had lost all our power, and they gave the word to abandon ship I guess about 3 o'clock, 3 or 4. And I remember they hit us with about 4 torpedoes and 2 bomb hits, and 2 planes crashed into the ship. And we didn't have any power either by that point, and the ship was settling, and they didn't ever sink it though. I climbed down on the destroyer, and we went round and round all the rest of the day till dark, and then that night at dark we turned off and went to we left the scene, and one destroyer stayed back there and sank it with gunfire, with 5-inch gunfire, and they hauled us down to New Caledonia and put us out on the beach in tents. We stayed there about a month. And then I went back on another small carrier. And
What was the name of that carrier?
I can't remember. I was on 2. It was either the Copahi or the Altamaha. They were trying to make combat carriers out of them, and they were these old short ships they converted into carriers. And they finally decided it wasn't a combat ship, and they sent my squadron back to the States in about February.
So did you see much more naval action after that particular time? You said you were transferred to a couple of other smaller carriers. And
yeah, we went from Guam from Fiji's to New Hebrides, and just, I don't know what they were doing, patrolling or something. And then they sent us back to the States, and I got to leave. I came home for about a month, and then I went back to Alameda, and I was shore base. I was working on aircraft there at Alameda, and then I went overseas again. I was tired of Oakland. I wanted to go somewhere. You couldn't go to where you wanted to, but you could always go overseas. You know, you didn't know where you was going, but at least you got there's a change, you know. And so I signed up for a draft, and wound up on Guam. We went into Guam right after the Marines secured the airfield at Agana, and I was there about 9 months. We were working on aircraft there, and then I got tired of Guam. You know, there's nowhere to go. Just make your own fun around, and whatever you did, go hunt coconuts in the jungle and stuff like that. So they wanted 2 guys to go to Okinawa. Okinawa just had started, and the guy was a friend of mine. I was in a tent with. We talked it over about 2 minutes and said, let's go. So we went to Okinawa.
well, it sounds like you had a very interesting naval experience to have fought in just about every major battle of the South Pacific during World War II, and I'm glad you made it through, could be with us today, and we appreciate your time this morning. The war in Europe officially ended at midnight on May 8, 1945, with the surrender of all German forces. The war against Japan would rage on for almost 4 more months. A major announcement was heard over the radio at 6 o'clock on Tuesday afternoon, August 14, 1945. Let's listen to the words of the Bartow Herald on the following Thursday.
Soon after the announcement came over the air at 6 o'clock Tuesday afternoon that the Japanese had agreed to the Potsdam surrender terms offered to them by the 4 Allied nations, the people of Cartersville entered into jubilant celebration for the peace that had come to the world. For several minutes after the official announcement was made, all was still and quiet. The people were breathless after waiting so long for official word to come. Then, like a new day dawning, Cartersville was alive with people and automobiles and noisemakers of every description. The celebration was like none that had ever been staged before in Cartersville. Everyone was happy and passing words of joy to their neighbors and friends. Strangers meeting on the street corner were like old friends meeting up again. A parade of automobiles formed and circled the business district again and again. The residential sections were quiet because very quickly the people had gathered in the downtown section. The mill whistle sounded and the fire siren gave out a shrill cry, informing the people of Cartersville that peace had come at last. Groups of soldiers were seen on every corner. Where they all came from in so quick a time, none will ever know, but their campaign ribbons and smiles that appeared on their faces added much to the occasion. On Wednesday, Cartersville was like a ghost town. All business houses were closed, including the drugstores. The churches were all open for citizens to come in and offer their silent prayers of thanksgiving and hope for a world that had suddenly gone mad to soon return to its normal life.